liabilities of $100 in reserves and $100 in currency. By the way, I'm sorry about this. These are all billions of dollars, okay? So think big money, billions of dollars, billions of dollars. So at first, let's look at the commercial banks and see if this is fully loaned out, okay? So we gotta look at our required reserve ratio, okay? Let's find a shot here. Try taking this slowly. Required reserve ratio is 20%, right? So R, 20%. Our multiplier, money multiplier. Can you guys see this? Is it okay? Money multiplier is 1 over our required reserve ratio. So R. Right? So let's check it out here. Let's see what a money multiplier is. It's 1 over 20%, right? So 1 over 0.2. 1 over 0.2, that gives us 5, right? So, hold on here. Let's put it this way. Sorry about that. Let's see what the required reserve is when we have 20%. Okay? So 500 are deposits. What the bank has times 0.2, you get 100. So in this case, you're fully loaned out because you have 500 total. You gotta deposit 100 into the Fed, and you loan out 400. You're fully loaned out in this case. Okay. So let's see what happens if we change our required reserve ratio. If we kick that up to from 20% to 30%, so you're required to store more money into the Fed. Actually, let's make it 25%, easier. Okay, so from 20% to 25 to 25. Okay. Disregard this, right? Let's see how much our money changes. So you have your reserves of 100. Reserves 100 times the money multiplier, so 1 over 0.25 gives you 400. So your deposits actually went down by 100 once you kick up your required reserve ratio by 5%. Deposits actually go down to 100. So you get $400 billion. Notice here, money supply equals currency plus deposits. Currency is 100 plus 500, you get 600, right? $600 billion. But once you kick up that 20% to 25, this becomes 400. 400 plus 100 gives you $500 billion. So by shifting it up by 5%, you're actually reducing your total money supply in the economy by $100 billion. Hope that makes sense. Okay? It's a little confusing about how it links, but that's the basics. Next slide, please. Now we're talking about our second tool, the discount rate. We still got some more time. Discount rate is the interest rate that banks pay to the Fed to borrow from it. So it's like it's that special interest rate because the Fed acts as the banker's bank. So when you borrow money from it, you're charged interest. Banks increase the money supply when they borrow from the Fed. Okay, the higher the discount rate, the lower the money supply, and vice versa. The lower the discount rate, the higher the money supply. Just look at it in our terms. If the interest rate is so high, when we borrow stuff from the bank, then we wouldn't want to borrow anything from it. It has a higher cost to us. And banks think the same way. If they want to borrow from the Fed, but the cost of interest is too high, then it would refrain from borrowing. And thus that would reduce the money supply. Next slide, please. Comes up our big table again. This one's pretty straightforward because you're just saying, if you borrow, your money goes up. If your interest rate is high, if the discount rate is high, banks won't come to borrow from the Fed so much, money supply won't kick up. In this case, you have commercial banks, reserves of $80 billion, loans of $320 billion, and deposits of $400 billion. On the Fed side, we have securities of $160 billion, reserves of $80 billion, and currency of $80 billion. So let's see what happens if the commercial bank decides to borrow $20 billion from the Fed. So here we go. Loans of $20 billion. The Fed gives out loans. On the commercial bank side, these serve as liabilities, debts. Okay, commercial banks owe $20 billion to the Fed. So by doing so, commercial banks have actually increased their reserves from 80 billion to 100 billion from this 20 that they borrowed. Okay? And once again, let's look at this easily, because from 80 to 100, you times that to your multiplier, which was 5, right? Which was 5. Your deposits is $500 billion. Increased by 100. This is wrong. It increased by 100. So you have increase in money supply because 500 plus currency is 580, right? Which is greater than your initial value, 400 plus the 80. So by borrowing money from the Fed, you boost up reserves. By boosting up reserves, you boost up the money supply in the end. Last one. Open market operations. It is the purchase and sale by the Fed of government securities in the open market. This one's the most used tool by the Fed because it is very precise, very easy to control, very easy to predict and reverse as well. It's used to expand or contract the amount of reserve in the system, and thus it can increase or restrict the money supply. Next slide. There you go. As I've said, very precise and flexible, used most often. Okay, open market purchase of securities boosts reserves and thus the money supply. On the other hand, open market sale of securities decreases reserves and thus the money supply. So think in terms of reserves and how are we going to work this out? Because the Fed just looks at it. If it wants to lower the money supply, then I lower the reserves by the means that are possible. In this case, if it wants to reduce the money supply, then it would sell the securities. So just remember this very important relationship. We'll come back to this one. Next slide, please. Our last table, the biggest one. All right, let's start from, once again, commercial banks, fully loaned out, $100 billion of deposits, reserves of $20 billion, and loans of 80. The Fed has securities of 100, reserves of $20 billion, and currencies of 80. But in this case, it added J&Q Public. This is like a private firm that kicks into the picture. Okay, so because we're going to concern the relationship of how this actually has in terms of purchasing the bonds. As you can see here, J&Q Public has deposits of $5 billion. So that's like a huge checking account that it has. It decides to buy $5 billion of securities, open markets, right? So we have your private firm buying $5 billion of securities. So as you can see, your securities from 100 has dropped down to 95 billion. Deposits by J&Q has reduced by $5 billion because they paid that amount to the Fed. But in securities, its bond, the check that it has, increases as an asset by $5 billion as well. So now let's look at the effects here. As you know, by doing so, by selling the bonds, it has an effect of reducing the reserves by the same amount, $5 billion. Reserves go down from 20 to 15. Okay? Of course, now you know that the money supply will have to go down for sure. But let's check if this is in equilibrium or not. Because if you guys remember, you gotta look at your required reserve, right? So let's see this. We're at 20% once again. $95 billion. 95 times 0.2, you get 19. At $95 billion, your required reserve is supposed to be $19 billion, but you're at 15. So you're $4 billion short. So how would you do this? This is actually the Fed strategy, of course. To do this, the commercial banks would have to reduce their loans or call back their loans. Okay? They would have to do that. And that would have an effect to reduce the money supply in the end. Here's what happens. The commercial banks, to actually satisfy the required reserve ratio, reduces loans by $20 billion from 80 to 60. That has an effect by reducing deposits by $25 billion. And if you can see here, you have deposits of $75 billion plus your currency of 80, gives you 155, which is $25 billion lower than what you started with, 180. Can you go back to the previous slide? Just one slide back. Yes, right here. Change in money supply is equal to the money multiplier times the change in reserves. Can we go back to that table again? It's pretty interesting. Change in reserves, $5 billion, okay? $5 billion times our money multiplier. 1 over 0.2 is 5, times 5, you get 25. Same thing. And also, shift the money supply, 180 billion, subtracted by 155, you get $25 billion, as our previous PowerPoint suggested. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much.